Today's webinar is entitled Hack Your Dream Job FTW. Your presenters are Nicole Passini and Jesse Lanz. I'm now happy to introduce Nicole and Jesse.
Hi, I'm Nicole.
Hi, I'm Jesse.
And before we get started, I just want to do a little introduction of what FTW is. I want to make sure everybody knows this. When we say FTW, what we are using it to mean is for the win, as it's often used in internet gamer parlance, i.e. Mario saves the princess, FTW, for the win. UrbanDictionary.com will give you a variety of other definitions that we are not ascribing to this webinar, my favorite of which is actually Free Taco Wednesdays. I wish that we could give you free tacos with this webinar, but alas.
So looking for a job can seem really daunting. If you're unemployed, there's a huge amount of pressure, obviously, to find a job. If you're currently employed and looking for a new job, the prospect of a major life change can be really scary. Wherever you're at in your life, searching, applying, and interviewing for jobs is a whole lot of work. It's time-consuming, it's emotionally draining, it's stressful, and it can even be demoralizing.
We want to acknowledge that the job search process is not easy, especially now in this economy. We want to give you some tools that are going to help you better communicate your particular skills and talents while navigating the job search process. We believe that there is a great job out there for you, a job that will tap into your amazing skills, a job that you'll find professionally satisfying, a job that will challenge you to become the awesome librarian you have the potential to be. We challenge you to have the audacity not to just look for a job, but for your dream job. You have to go to work every day anyway, right? So why should you listen to us? Like I said, my name is Nicole Passini, and I currently work as the branch manager for the Woodside and Portola Valley branches of the San Mateo County Library. For about 3 years prior to this, I worked as the training and staff development manager at San Mateo County Library. While in that role, I coordinated staff recruitment, supported hiring managers, and did a lot of work related to training, HR, and staffing. Prior to that, I worked on collections and services for teens and children in San Mateo County Library and Phoenix Public Library. Before working in libraries, I was the executive director of a literacy tutoring nonprofit in Phoenix.
And I am Jesse Lanz. I'm the community library manager for the Diamond Bar Library, which is part of the County of Los Angeles Public Library. Before that, I served for the county as the adult services and then the lead adult services librarian at the West Covina Library. Over the years, I've had many library positions, starting from my very first job as a shelving page in my hometown library in Northeast Ohio. Outside of libraries, I've also worked as a trainer and sales coach for new employees in the food service and retail industries. In addition to ourselves, however, we also polled a lot of managers and library directors in California and beyond for their input on what they are looking for in applicants, and we're going to share that with you today.
So we've both hired people and applied for a lot of jobs ourselves. Just a little housekeeping. As we go through, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Some we may table till the end. Some we may just leave and wait until we get to a section that might answer your question. So feel free to ask questions as we go. We'll try to address them as we can. So have you heard? The economy is still horrible.
Yeah, as you might have noticed if you've been paying attention to New York Times, NPR, the Wall Street Journal, or basically any news source anywhere, the economic recovery is going slowly, and government tends to be on the tail end of that. We're not going to cite any depressing unemployment statistics or talk about the financial straits that a lot of libraries are finding themselves in these days, because you already know all of that. But for this reason, now more than ever, it's important to be smart and strategic about how you present yourself in a job interview. It's critical that you communicate clearly why you are the best possible candidate for your dream job.
Take a deep breath first and relax. Our first piece of advice is stay positive throughout your job hunt. And remember what Calming Manatee says, everything will be okay.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about figuring out what it is that you want to do. We'll talk briefly about the civil service process, and we're going to talk about how to develop successful resumes, applications, and interviews.
And this is just an overview of the sections of our presentation today. So before we get started, what we want to know is where you're at in your career. If you could go, you'll see a poll right now up on your screen, and if you could select which of those options applies to you right now. Are you a student? Are you still in school, either undergrad or getting your MLIS?
And maybe you have a job, but maybe it's not quite your dream job yet, and you're thinking about maybe making a move, maybe sooner, maybe later.
Maybe you're unemployed and looking around very seriously.
Or maybe you just like webinars and are just happy to be here.
So go ahead and answer the poll.
Yeah, we'll give you just another minute here. Okay, all right. Let's see, I'm very curious to see what everyone says here, and it's taking just a minute for this poll to close down. Closing. Okay. All right. And I'm very happy to see, and hopefully you all can see the results there as well, that there are several of you that just like webinars, and I really hope that we can come through with that this morning.
So we'd like to have you go ahead and answer another question for us, and if you could put these answers in the chat for us. Give us an idea of if you have a career goal right now, what is it? Either whether it's short-term or long-term, go ahead and put it up in the chat.
Let's see. Okay. Let's see, I see a few people. I'm glad to hear that some people have their dream jobs. I also hear that people can't hear me, so I'm going to try to speak up. And if you still can't hear me, let me know. All right.
I see some responses about full-time, part-time, working virtually, working from home, being able to retire. That's a good goal.
Yeah, want more money? Yes, that's very good.
Dream job. I see that. Rare books and manuscripts.
Sure. Oh, and getting a job that uses my master's degree. Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, so please feel free to keep putting those into the chat. And we're going to move on to the next slide now.
So are you really not sure where you want to go next? I definitely have been in the position myself where I knew that I wanted to do something new, but I didn't know what it was. To help you think about some long-term career goals, you could think about what it is you enjoy doing. Is there something you see others doing that interests you? Is there a way you could test drive new areas of responsibility within your current position? Is there a way you could try out new areas of librarianship, maybe as a volunteer? Could you do informational interviews with people that have jobs that you might be interested in? Is there a way that you could connect with mentors who will help you figure out what path you maybe should be thinking about taking?
So this is what we want to ask you if you do have that in mind, you have your career goal in mind. What is it that you can do now to prepare for what you want to do next? And actually, InfoPeople is hosting a webinar next month on August 14th, Developing Your Plan for Successful Career Growth and Advancement. And I think that would it sounds like a great webinar, and it might be something that if this is something you're thinking about a lot, you might want to look into. For today, though, we really want you to think about this question. If you know what you want to do next, if you can identify what kind of work would make up your dream job, what should you be doing now to prepare yourself to get that job? We're talking about things that are separate from your formal job search, the experiences and work you want to have that will make you an excellent candidate for your dream job. So in the chat box now, if you could just share with us what you think good strategies are to prepare yourself. What are you doing right now yourself to get ready for your dream job? What strategies can you recommend to other participants?
Oh, great. Attending webinars, good stuff. And thanks. Eileen just posted the link to that webinar that Nicole was just talking about. That looks like a great one.
Informational interviews, that's a great idea. That's something that we
that
definitely wanting to talk about today.
It's been personally helpful for me for certain. School is very good. Volunteering, excellent. Great strategies.
Taking software classes.
And keeping up with LinkedIn, very good.
Mm-hmm. Volunteering is a great way to get some additional skills.
Yep. Excellent. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, but please feel free to keep sharing those strategies.
Absolutely. So in getting ready for your next step, of course you want to be good at your current job, whatever that is. Take it to the next level and ask for responsibilities that will give you experience that relates to your goals. Are there opportunities to take on new projects or initiative in your current job that might give you, a different kind of good experience or help you strengthen skills that you might need strengthening? For example, let's say you want to be a children's librarian, but you don't have any storytime experience. Is there a way, even though you're not the children's librarian, you might be able to get storytime training at work? Could you assist at story times? Maybe you could expand your library story time by doing an outreach story time. Or if you don't work at a library at all, is there a way that you could maybe volunteer to assist at a story time at your local library?
If I were in the position to be hiring for a children's librarian, I would probably look pretty favorably on a candidate who, for example, had worked as an aider or shelver or a volunteer and led story times. That tells me that that person is personally motivated and they're willing to take on new challenges, even if they might fall into the other responsibilities as required, part of their job description. It just shows me that they're really enthusiastic about the work. Do you already have a lot on your plate at work? So does everybody else. Challenge yourself to stretch a bit further. Do like the Courage Wolf. Bite off more than you can chew, then chew it. I totally stole this from another Eureka webinar, but I really like the Courage Wolf.
So on your screen, you're seeing some qualities that the hiring managers that we surveyed brought up multiple times as being highly desirable. Are these qualities that you have right now? Where do you excel? Where maybe could you use some work? Is there something you can do at work now to embody these traits? The managers we surveyed didn't say, I really want someone that has experience with our ILS, or they need to know how to use every database that we have. Having hard skills is important, but hiring managers are really looking at your attitude as well as your experience.
When we were surveying library managers throughout California, one person responded back to us, I'm looking for somebody who's excited about the profession and has a personality. I can teach you the skills to be a good librarian, but I can't teach you the personality.
Managers ultimately want someone who's going to support the work they're trying to accomplish in the library. You want to work with people who will support you, so why wouldn't a manager want the same thing? Being supportive of change doesn't mean passively accepting every single thing management wants you to do, but it does mean offering your input in a productive, timely fashion, and then when the final decision is made, getting on board with it, whether you think that it's a genius choice or maybe a misguided one.
Is there an opportunity in your work for you to constructively support change right now? Supporting change is a skill, just like public speaking or HTML coding. It's something you can learn and practice. And I see a question from Elizabeth. Is this program about school and public libraries only? We are going to talk about the civil service process coming up here, which is going to apply to public libraries, but I think we have some insights that would be applicable to you if you're looking for work in other libraries. So, I just wanted to answer that question really quickly. So moving on, I just want to remind everyone that none of us is Joan Jett. Reputation. You need to care about your reputation. Your reputation at your current job is critical to you landing a future job. Your reputation is probably going to follow you, whether you're changing departments, libraries, or careers. So you need to build a name for yourself at work that you can feel proud of.
And what do you want to be known for at work? Do you want to be known for being an innovator, a team player, a hard worker? Every day you need to be reinforcing this image of yourself through your behavior and your work.
A really big part of your reputation is based on your interpersonal skills. We all need to work to maintain positive relationships with all of our coworkers. All of them, even the ones we don't like. That means no fights, pillow-based or otherwise. Work to resolve conflict productively and on your own as much as possible. If you have to involve your boss, be prepared to own up to how you've contributed to the problem and constructively work towards a solution.
Now, if I'm thinking about hiring someone, in addition to calling the references, I'm probably also going to ask around, see if I can find some current or past coworkers or supervisors, maybe some people you've worked with on a professional committee. I'm going to try to talk to people that you didn't list as references. And I think a lot of managers will shape the tree to see who else they can chat with about you. And obviously, to the greatest extent possible, you want most people to have good things to say about you.
We also all need to think about our online reputations. Prospective employers will, if they're smart, research you online as extensively as possible. When I research a job applicant, I want to, 1, get a sense of the person's personality, 2, see if there are articles, etc., that corroborate or expand upon what they've told me about their work, and 3, see if this person is smart enough not to have ridiculous stuff connected to them on the internet. What you need to figure out is whether your online presence is supportive of, neutral to, or detrimental to your job search. Do you need to address a problem? Can you advertise an asset, such as articles about your work?
Okay, and you should definitely Google yourself. What comes up first? Is the information correct? How does it make you look? It can be helpful to set up a Google alert for your name so that when there are new search results about you, you'll know immediately. This is really easy to do, and if you don't know how, you can just Google Alerts, and it takes about 30 seconds. You also need to consider your social network reputation. Definitely use professional sites like LinkedIn to make your resume public, but you also need to think about your personal social network presence. I think we've all heard the horror stories about people whose negative or unprofessional Facebook profiles have come back to haunt them. Does your Facebook page present the image that you want to present, perhaps to a future employer? How do your profiles look to people that you aren't friends with? And again, this is another really easy thing to check, and you should do it. You might be surprised what you see.
So let's talk about references. The first piece of advice I'd like to give everyone is when you want someone to give you a reference, you have to ask them first. I've contacted references who didn't know the call was coming, and then they didn't feel that comfortable giving a reference for the person who had recommended them.
And if you're applying for a new job within your current organization, don't list the hiring manager as a reference. They're going to want to check in with people, other people, even if they already know you well. A current or past manager or supervisor is going to be the best reference, followed by coworkers and professional contacts. Personal friends are definitely low on the list, and family would be at the very bottom. Listing a reference whose relationship is friend or aunt really doesn't look good.
I had a professor in college who told me to ask specifically, can you give me a good reference? And once you have people who will enthusiastically endorse your work, you want to let them know when you're looking for a job and that you'll be listing them as references on a number of applications. And then every time you go back to apply for more jobs, let them know what you're doing so that they can be prepared to say wonderful things about you.
So you can check in with mentors about what they recommend. What is it that you can do specifically to make yourself a better candidate? What weaknesses and what strengths do they see in you, in your skill set, in your experience? How's your resume? What aren't you doing in your job search that you could be doing? And for those of you that maybe don't have a mentor can be someone that you know well. It could be someone that a friend connects you with. It can be someone that you just call up out of the blue. A mentor can be someone that you communicate with regularly, but it also can be someone that you just ask for advice one time. Librarians are really generous. We like to give people information, so don't be afraid to reach out to someone you don't know well and ask them for some advice.
Some of our responses at the beginning said that people were already working with or looking for mentors, and that's really support that personally. For me, I had a mentor who did practice interviews with me, edited my resume, and gave me advice on what areas I needed more experience in. She was extremely helpful to me in understanding what I needed to do to get the job that I wanted. A good friend of mine who wanted to become a law librarian contacted the local head of a law library to ask her some questions about the profession generally. It was just kind of an out-of-the-blue contact, and the librarian ended up inviting her to a Law Librarian Association meeting, which connected with her with a whole bunch of other law librarians, and it turned into a really great experience for her. The lesson there, I think, is really don't be afraid to ask somebody you haven't met yet. The worst that they can say is no. And like Jesse said, I feel like librarians can be extremely generous. I just wanted to, before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to point out Trevor's comment, how about previous customers as references? I think that's a really interesting idea. I would use previous customers as references in addition to past supervisors and past managers, so sort of as an extra bonus contact. But I think that's a really, really great idea.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the civil service process that most states, cities, counties, which includes their public and state libraries, use for recruiting and hiring in some form or other. Now, can you use your little hand-raising button there and raise your hand if you have some experience with applying and interviewing in the civil service environment? Okay, definitely seeing some hands here. Okay, now raise your hand if you found this difficult, irritating, or slow. Yes. Yes, quite a few of you.
So I think that kind of tends to be a frequent experience of the civil service interviewing process. So I want to talk a little bit about the background of civil service hiring so that we can have an understanding of its purpose besides just making for long hiring processes. Up until the early 1800s, America was in the spoils era of government employment. Basically, the idea was that whoever was in power cleaned house and put in their own people. We're looking at rampant cronyism and nepotism in government. There's also a lot of problems created when so many staff are replaced so regularly and quickly. Institutional knowledge just gets lost, right? So then in the 1870s, Ulysses Grant begins implementing reform. Other presidents continued the effort, and the Civil Service Act of 1883 made it so that merit as the basis for hiring was guaranteed by law. Certain practices, like eligible lists and panel interviews, that were put into practice then are still used today. So the whole goal of the civil service process is to ensure fairness, competitiveness, and transparency in hiring. Public libraries are usually attached to larger entities, cities, counties, and states, and so they're required to follow the civil service rules in place in their jurisdiction. If you're a school or academic or law librarian, it could be that you might be at some point interviewing in a civil service environment, but I see this as really applying most frequently to public library staff.
Okay, and for those of you that indicated that you had done this at one point, there are definitely some pretty big differences between interviewing in a civil service environment versus interviewing in the private sector. The civil service, as we just talked about, it's open and competitive.
And in the private sector, hiring is open and competitive, unless it's not, and they're hiring their niece's boyfriend.
So in the civil service, everything is highly formalized, it's rule-based, and though it might seem sort of Byzantine, it's a very transparent hiring process.
And in the private sector, the process may or may not be very formal or transparent. It just depends on the company.
And also, as people indicated before, the civil service process is usually slow. And in the private sector, speed just really depends on the company. They could hire someone tomorrow, or it could take quite some time. So the civil service process. The best way to understand an individual library's hiring process is to read everything, which can sometimes seem a bit daunting. We're including a handout on the civil service process, but individual counties, cities, and states will have specific processes that you'll want to know about when you're serious about a position. Every jurisdiction is going to have some information available about their hiring process online. So is there a closing date for this job, or is it a continuous recruitment? Will there be any testing, or is it just interviews? Have they set the dates for these already?
In a civil service environment, it is critical for you to read all the application instructions. Some jurisdictions are going to want a resume and a cover letter from you, and some will ask you to fill out a work history form and answer essay questions. You want to give them whatever they ask for. Don't write C cover letter or C resume if you've been asked to input work history and answer essay questions.
And if you have any questions of your own, don't be afraid to contact the organization's Human Resources Department. There's probably someone there that is assigned to recruitment, and they will definitely be very helpful.
So there are three big ways that the civil service process varies from the private sector process. First of all, interviews themselves are going to feel different from interviews in the private sector. The ideal experience for a job interview would be like sitting down with Terry Gross, right? She'd put you at ease, make you comfortable, ask probing questions. Terry would help you portray your best self.
Instead, you'll probably get this guy.
Actually, it's going to be more like this. A wall of three people who have been interviewing applicants since 8 a.m., and they're wondering what's happening back at their branch, and the guy who interviewed before you just went on and on and on, and they're really ready for lunch. It's not going to feel encouraging.
I've encountered many, many people who find that the panel interview is really difficult to do well in. It's not engaging back and forth. The panelists are often taking notes while you're speaking. It's really to help them keep score and keep all the interviewees straight, but they might not be making eye contact with you. They'll ask a scripted set of questions, and they probably won't answer many of the questions that you ask them back.
I've also talked to applicants who went through a panel interview and decided they didn't really like the particular library system because of the people at the interview seemed so cold and off-putting. This point in the process is not the time to judge the library itself. Highly formalized interviews are just part of what the Civil Service Code in most jurisdictions require.
So you have to bring your energy and enthusiasm with you. You have to prepare because you're not going to get much help once you're in there. I've been blown away by job applicants who came not only prepared, but also were able to show their enthusiasm and their passion for libraries. It is possible, and we'll talk later and give you some tips about how to accomplish this.
Scoring is the other piece of the civil service process you should keep in mind. Every step of the process, you are scored. Your application, your interview. That means you should be following directions and playing by the rules, just like when you play Pac-Man.
Every portion of the hiring process, from your resume all the way through the interview, needs to be polished and professional in order for you to do well in this scoring.
So moving on from the civil service process, we're going to take a look at a supervisory librarian job announcement and analyze it together. I just picked a recent job announcement, and I removed the specifics from what we're going to see here, just to give you a good idea of how to go through a job announcement, pick it apart, and figure out how to match your skills to it.
So why should we do this instead of just jumping into the application? You really need to have a good understanding of the job in order to create an application that convinces the hiring manager that you are the best possible applicant. So you can ask yourself, what skills, abilities, and knowledge are they looking for? What would the ideal candidate look like for this job? Am I that candidate? What does the announcement tell you about the library system itself? You can learn a lot by reading those announcements.
What we see in the announcement here is an overwhelmingly long list of tasks. My eyes are already glazing over. One important thing that applicants forget to do is read the entire job description thoroughly.
So I'm going to start first by going through the job announcement methodically. I'll tick off the tasks that I have a lot of experience with. Then I'll go through and evaluate the tasks that I might have some transferable or related experience in. And then finally, I'll go off and tick off the tasks that would be totally new to me. As I do this evaluating what I have a lot or a little experience in, I'm also going to look for themes or groups of tasks. So what tasks are all sort of a piece of the same thing. I'll go through and highlight the stuff that I think falls under standard librarian work, all of which I have a fair amount of experience with. Let's say I've done 1 million programs and I'm really strong in my reference and reader's advisory skills. I want to make sure I really emphasize these skills and experiences in that area in my application and my resume and my cover letter.
There are also a number of collections duties listed here, weeding and selection, etc. So Jesse can think about his collections experience holistically as well. Let's say he hasn't done much selection of materials, but he's done a lot of weeding and replacement lists and things like that. This tells him that when he answers the written questions or writes his cover letter, he's going to want to focus on his strengths in the area of collections while also explaining his interest in getting more experience in selection, maybe also mentioning any education he's had in that area. So that's all the standard librarian work he's pulled out of the description. And Jesse can see that there are 2 areas he's a really big rock star in and one that he's pretty solid in.
Okay, so now I'm going to look at the area maybe I have a little less experience with. As I go through the list of tasks, I can see they want a librarian who can supervise, and let's say I haven't really formally supervised anyone yet. But as I look more closely, it's also clear that they want someone to manage a program area, and I think maybe I do have some direct experience there.
So now Jesse is going to want to think about his experience and how it relates to these areas. Let's say Jesse has managed teen programming in his current library. Sometimes he delegates tasks to other staff and works with other staff on teen services, and that makes him feel pretty confident that he could lead a program area. But supervision in a library setting isn't something he has direct experience with. So he's going to start thinking about what experience he has that's transferable, related but not exactly in the same area. So maybe Jesse's managed a volunteer or interns. Maybe he was the lead barista at Starbucks in college. Maybe he led a committee or work group. Maybe he's taken some supervisory prep courses. In his application, Jesse is really going to want to emphasize how interested he is in growing in this area while touching on his nascent experience.
It's also good to go through and look for keywords that come up multiple times or that just jump out. Analyze, plan, diverse communities, principles of management. Are there ways that we could pull those phrases into the application somehow? What's the language of the job announcement tell about the organization? So let's talk for a minute about getting the feel for a library. And if everyone can type into the chat box things that they have done that have helped them get a good feel for a library or an organization where they were trying to get a job. How did you do your research? Was there, what's been helpful? What's been a good way to get to know a new organization?
Working in an organization is a good way to get an idea of it, absolutely.
Networking, looking at the website, looking at their social media presence.
Oh, demographic data of the city, that's a great idea. Getting a sense for the area that the library is in, what's that community like, that's a great idea.
Being a customer at that library, using the library, visiting in person, talking to former employees.
Talking to former employees is an awesome idea. Navigating the catalog, totally. Going through the process of being a patron for that library.
Oh, and volunteer work. Excellent.
Okay, so feel free to keep putting that stuff up. We're going to go ahead and keep talking here. You guys have said a lot of the stuff that we're going to touch on. While you're researching the library that you're applying for a job at, we really think you should keep these questions in mind. Is this the kind of library that you want to work for? And you also want to ask yourself, what don't they have that I can bring to the table? So when you're preparing, you need to visit the website, as many people mentioned. What's their catalog look like? Can you use their chat or online reference? What events do they have coming up? What services do they offer? You really want to check out their mission, their vision, their strategic plan and goals. And ask yourself, is there any way to tie your experience to their goals?
And as much as possible, it's great if you can visit the library. What's the building look like? What does their customer service look like? Their collections? How about their computers? Or how about their automation system? You could also call and ask them a question.
Somebody mentioned talking to former employees at the library, and I think that's a great idea. You should always ask friends and colleagues about the library. You know, do you know anybody who works for the system or used to work for the system? Even if you can talk to somebody who works in the area, the same geographic location as the library, maybe they can tell you what kind of a reputation that library has. It's also a great idea just to search for news stories about the library. Can you find stories about their events, their services, their funding? What kind of reputation do they have with the community? And again, as I think somebody mentioned in the chat as well, you know, check out their social networking presence. What's that look like?
So this right here is why you need to research the library in advance. One director told us that if an applicant said they hadn't visited the library before, for him, the interview is over. If he considers that they didn't prepare, and that reflects a characteristic that he just doesn't want on his staff.
So let's move on from research. Just about any job you want is going to require you to submit some kind of paperwork, and we're going to focus on two here, the application and the resume.
And you might be asking yourself, why all this paperwork? Or more to the point, why do I need to worry about the resume and the application? Both. They both have the same information on them, right? As we discussed earlier, the civil service process is likely to require you to fill out an application form, which may or may not be scored as part of your exam. And it's also likely that you'll be able to upload your resume, which again may or may not be considered as part of your score. But either way, you need to make sure that everything you submit represents you as in the best possible way. You can consider it the very first assignment of your new job.
Oh, sorry. So I know that often filling out job applications can make you feel like this. It makes me feel like that sometimes too. So here's a few pointers to help you get through it.
Okay, it seems obvious that you should always follow instructions, but in the civil service environment, it's completely vital. You could be docked points or even eliminated for consideration if any of the information is missing or inaccurate. If at all possible, have a friend look over the application for you just to make sure you haven't missed or make sure that you haven't misunderstood something.
Keep in mind that your application is essentially a sample of business writing that you're submitting to a potential employer. Be sure to check your grammar and make sure that all your T's are crossed, I's dotted, and your apostrophes appropriately either there or not.
Also keep in mind that spell check will catch some errors, but not all of them. For instance, it's only a one-letter difference between saying you have experience running a team and saying you have experience ruining a team. The spell check's not going to catch it, so definitely, if you can, have someone take over a second look and proofread for you.
If there are essay or short answers questions, or if you're asked for a cover letter, you really need to hit the sweet spot with length and amount of detail you provide. Think Goldilocks, not too long, not too short, just right. You want to be succinct while also communicating your experiences and skills clearly.
Okay, so now the resume. Some libraries will ask for a resume and some won't, but will give you the option of uploading one. Whether they're asking for a resume or an application, you want one drafted so that you're ready, you have it ready to go to put it in with your application if you can. So let's backtrack for just a minute here and define what the actual purpose of a resume is. A resume is the summary or the highlights of your education and experience. Its purpose is to get you an interview. The interview is really your opportunity to explain in more detail about your experiences and your accomplishments. For the resume, it's okay to be specific, but you really don't want every last detail. If you do the resume right, you'll get to explain those details in person later on. So how long should your resume be? Most good resume books, and you'll find some listed in our bibliography at the end of this webinar, recommend a one-page resume. You'll also find some books that recommend a two-pager, but if you do go with the two-page resume, make sure that you're using that second page to the fullest. If there's just a few lines trickling on, then really you've got a one-page resume that needs some editing. Also, the length of your resume might correlate to where you are in your career. If you're applying for a library director position, you have 10+ years of experience in libraries, you may have earned that second page. If your resume is more than 2 pages, you probably need to rethink or rework it.
While you might think that a longer resume will better enumerate the many ways you are qualified for a position, this can easily backfire. For one thing, hiring managers are busy, and they're going to appreciate a clear and concise summary of your merits. And in an extreme case, a very long resume could communicate that you're some sort of an egomaniac, or perhaps even worse for someone applying for a librarian job, that you've never looked at any resume book ever. If you think this can't happen, we had one colleague report he received a 78-page resume. This is not the first step in getting your dream job. Remember Goldilocks.
Okay, so let's talk for a minute about the overall look of the resume. The overall visual impression should be neat, clear, organized. As far as the font or typeface goes, it should be legible and professional. Type is really evocative for some people, including typeface nerds like me, so it's best to avoid anything overly flowery, whimsical, or retro. I would definitely recommend erring on the side of neutral when it comes to fonts. And if you're really curious about what the typeface on your resume might be communicating about you, there's a great book called Just My Type, a book about fonts that I highly recommend. While we're speaking about fonts, make sure that you use a size that's readable. There's no cheating on turning your 2-page resume into a 1-page resume just by making the font really small. And yes, Arial or Times New Roman, those are definitely safe bets for sure.
You do want to include white space in your resume. It's not just for margins. A resume should not look like a solid block of text. As you scan the page, your eyes should be drawn to the major sections of the resume.
And as we've said before, it's absolutely essential to proofread. Just one silly error could be the difference between getting your dream job and not. Having someone else proofread your resume is really vital. A second set of eyes is going to catch what you've become blind to after reworking your resume 1,500 times. And again, spell check's great, but it's not perfect.
So I can't identify all of the abbreviations that we've got listed here, and I don't think most of you can either. So don't put them in your application or resume without defining them first.
You also need to be consistent on your resume. Here's 2 sets of phrases that you might find on someone's resume. The phrases on the left all begin with action verbs, and they're all in the same verb tense. The phrases on the right mean exactly the same thing, but some start with verbs, some start with nouns. The verbs are all in different tenses. Even though it means the same thing, it doesn't read as well. One of my very favorite career guides compares resumes to sonnets or haiku. Each word should be carefully chosen for its maximum effect.
By the way, the phrases on the left are all good because they're all consistent with each other. But what would make them even more effective would be to add quantities. Anything you can quantify in your resume, do it. So in the example above, it would be more effective to say presented story times to 75 children weekly, or provided customer service in a library with 250,000 annual visits. Again, it's good to pull in keywords from the job announcement as applicable.
Resumes are typically made up of phrases. It's not necessary to use complete sentences, and it's okay to leave out articles like a, an, or the. If you're wondering where you can find extra room for that white space we were just talking about, getting rid of the unnecessary articles is a great place to start.
So now we're going to talk about interviews, which can sometimes feel pretty intimidating, almost like a trip to Mordor.
Because we're back to these guys. Assuming you've done your homework and spruced up or totally revamped your resume, hopefully you'll wind up with an interview. So you're nervous? That's perfectly normal. You've got a lot riding on this, including your dream job. So we have a few tips for this to help you out as well.
So now you really need to put all the homework you've done on your dream library to work. Just a few minutes ago, we saw how important the hiring managers we surveyed felt it was to demonstrate that you've adequately researched the job in the library. Your interviewers will certainly notice that you've taken the time to do your homework. Make sure you review your research.
And while you'll never know for certain what questions you're going to be asked in an interview, you can probably make an educated guess about the things that they will ask you based on the job announcement. If the job announcement lists a lot of customer service duties, be prepared to discuss your customer service experience. Being confident that you have answers in mind for these questions will give you a huge head start in terms of preparing for the interview.
So in the chat box, if everyone could think about the interviews they've been on in the past and just kind of type in the chat what kinds of questions you've been asked. I think it's just really helpful to look at different kinds of questions that are used. Things come up kind of over and over again. So go ahead and type in the chat questions you've been asked at an interview in the past.
The infamous scenario questions, absolutely.
Are you a circle or a square? I don't even know how I would answer that. Problem patrons, that's definitely a really common question. Why do you want to work here? That's a really good question.
Anything you would like to add? I think we'll be addressing that a little bit later on. What types of programs?
Experience with technology. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Great question. Right.
How did you handle conflict with a coworker? Absolutely.
Very good. And you can continue to add those to the chat. Those are all really good questions. We asked the same question to our experts, and we found that there were definitely similarities in the things that they said that they asked on interviews. And actually, you have already hit on quite a few of these. Customer service was a really popular question topic, and our experts often asked interviewees to describe the customer experiences they had had, and that might even be outside of the library setting. They asked job candidates how they might handle a disagreement or a difference in philosophy with their supervisor or administration. They asked questions about place of technology in the library and how you might handle customer service issues that arise when customers have difficulty with technologies. And finally, a lot of our experts said they asked questions about candidates to get them to talk about how they handle or approach change.
So there are some intimidating questions that you just know you're going to be asked at some point. So it's good to be prepared for them in practice.
So the first question you're often going to be asked is a combination of the very big and gigantic, tell us about yourself, or describe how your education and experience have prepared you for this position. And you want to respond with, can I get a prompt here? Do you want to narrow it down? But you should be expecting a question like this because almost every interview opens with a warm-up question like that. You can have a little elevator speech prepared for yourself. Draft and practice a 1 to 3 minute overview of what makes you a great candidate for the job. In a way, this question is a freebie. It's a chance to summarize your many sparkling accomplishments and your fabulous qualities. So be prepared for it.
And I think, you know, your little elevator speech could also be your answer to why should we hire you? You know, that's kind of what you're summing up there. What are your weaknesses? Why is this question so hard? Well, because you're in the interview for your dream job and you only want to talk about your strengths. It can be really tempting to blurt out something trite or disingenuous like, I work too hard, or I'm a perfectionist. The best bet here is really to be honest, but you should probably also use an example of a weakness that you're aware of and you're working on overcoming. For example, for me, I'm not a naturally organized person. It's definitely a weakness, and it used to be a significant problem for me. But it's a weakness I'm aware of, and so I've been working on it for quite some time, and I have a lot of systems in place to keep myself organized. It doesn't come naturally. It's a bit of a slog for me, but I'm always working on it.
And by the way, we chose the image on this slide intentionally to illustrate another point. If you're going to use humor in an interview, be very careful. While your great sense of humor might be well received, you also might come across as being unprofessional, or even worse, you might offend someone. So if you're going to be funny, play it safe.
We're librarians and we're used to answering questions, and while this t-shirt might be a little bit harsh, I think we're all aware that some questions are better than others. Often, the very last question you're asked in an interview is if you have any questions for the interviewer. It's possible that in a civil service exam type interview you won't get the opportunity, or that what you say at this point wouldn't be scored. But nevertheless, your response is going to be the last thing you say before the interview concludes, so you want it to be memorable. In a second interview, smart, probing questions will show your interest in the position, demonstrate you've spent some time thinking about the position and the organization, and that you've got some strong professional knowledge.
So what are good questions to ask? A good question will demonstrate that you've done your homework. It will show you're curious to learn more about the position and the organization. A not so good question will show that you haven't taken the time to do your homework. It's okay to ask questions about the interviewer's own experiences at the library or to ask them questions about their thoughts on the organization. Pretty much everyone likes to talk about themselves, and interviewers are no different there. You should also not ask a question that's very, very specific or something that the interviewer could have no way of knowing. Stumping your interviewer with a really tough question might prove that you're smart, but it could also make the interviewer feel icky or resentful, and that's probably not how you want them to feel when they're considering hiring you. We had one retired library administrator that told us if job candidates tried to sound like they already knew everything there was to know about the library, she considered that a real red flag that indicated they would be unwilling to listen to good advice in the future. So again, I think that really just speaks to the importance of thinking out some good strategic questions in advance.
Absolutely.
For some of us, including myself, talking about ourselves isn't easy, but it's something that you're going to have to get over if you want your dream job. It's a good idea to think about 4 or 5 stories you can tell about yourself that demonstrate the qualities your future employer is likely to want. Practice these stories. Tell them to yourself in the mirror, practice them in the shower, practice them with your dog if you need to. Just get used to telling them.
You really want to think about how your stories present you as a candidate for this position. Review the job announcement before your interview and think about your stories relate to the position description. If your stories aren't presenting you in a clear, favorable way, rethink and tweak your stories or think about new stories that demonstrate that you're the right candidate for the job.
So now that you've thought about all the questions you might be asked, as well as some that you'd like to ask yourself, have a friend ask you these questions. A good friend will give you some honest feedback about your answers. And if you really want to be sure about how you're coming across, video yourself answering the questions. Now, this is definitely not for the faint of heart. That's kind of the nuclear option. You may be surprised at how often you say that you raise your voice at the end of every phrase so your answers sound more like questions. Or you might notice that you have some sort of distracting habit, like touching your face or playing with your earrings while you talk. Nicole?
Yes, it's true. I do that. It's a problem. And I was informed of that by my wife while she was quizzing me on interview questions. Knowing is totally half the battle. Once you have this information, you can be more self-aware about how you're coming across during an interview and make sure your communication style isn't getting in the way of the substance of your answers.
Now it's the day of your interview. Here's a few quick tips to help you through the main event. First of all, it's normal to want to jump into every question the moment you're asked it, but there's nothing wrong with taking a pause and reflecting before you start responding.
Civil service interviews will often be timed, so you also want to be aware of that and pace yourself. As you answer each question, you want to make sure you answer fully. On the other hand, interviewers will quickly become bored or impatient if you're rambling. Since you've done your research and practiced, you'll be able to clearly and concisely answer each question by telling great, to-the-point stories about yourself while you do. Remember, you don't need to give every single detail of your experience. Again, Goldilocks.
And if you're having trouble with it, a good framework for getting your stories concise is STAR, which stands for situation or task, action, and result. Pull a specific situation or task and describe it in 2 to 3 sentences. Describe the action that you took and make it, specifically the action that you did, and then describe the result. In other words, how successful your actions were, what you learned, and again, keep it brief. So STAR, situation, task, action, result. You wouldn't think we'd have to remind professional librarians of this, but a lot of the hiring managers we surveyed noted that it's very important for job candidates to look the part. And one of my personal mentors always says, dress for the job you want, not the one you have. So dress for success.
This also might seem like an obvious tip, but if you've never taken part in a civil service panel interview before, you might get thrown off. Remember to shake hands with each member of the panel at the beginning of the interview as you introduce yourself, and then again at the end. As you're leaving, make sure that you take the time to thank the panel. It never hurts to say thank you.
throughout the course of the interview, you'll want to make sure that you make eye contact with each of the members of the interview panel. If the panel members are taking turns asking you the question, it's okay to direct your responses more to the person that asked the question, but you want to avoid only making eye contact with one of the interviewers. And when you're shaking hands, make sure that you make eye contact then too.
Of course, you don't want to confuse making eye contact with staring. That's no good.
So it's perfectly normal to be nervous for interviews. We aren't going to tell you that you shouldn't be. In fact, being nervous is just a sign that you want to do well. So take a few deep breaths. It really helps.
If you're still nervous, it's good to keep in mind that the people sitting across the table are probably a bit nervous too. Hiring and training a new employee represents a huge investment in time and resources. The people interviewing you are making this decision based on a few pieces of paper and some short conversations with you. They should really be nervous.
And just remember, everyone on the panel wants you to make it abundantly clear that you are the best possible candidate for the position. They want you to make their job of hiring a new staff member an easy, clear-cut decision.
And if you don't get the job and you're feeling really discouraged, I want you to imagine that this guy got the job. Whenever I don't get a job I've applied for and was really excited about, I've just imagined that the most amazing, awesome, super heroic person possible got the job. Obviously, right?
Obviously. Okay.
So we've got a little bit of time for questions. Of course, if you have to go at 1, that's fine, but Jesse and I will be here for a few more minutes and be happy to take questions.
And thank you all so much for attending.
Yes, thank you. I see a question from Martha Camacho. What types of questions would you ask of an outside panel that is not on staff at the library you're applying for? So sometimes in a panel interview, you will have folks on the panel who are not on the staff of the library. In a civil service panel interview, you might not have the opportunity to ask questions, so it might not be an issue. If you do, I think it's still good to ask the same questions you would anyway. The panelists have probably been briefed on what the library's priorities are, what they're really looking for, you know, in the person who fills the position. So I think you can kind of still ask the same questions, and if they can't answer them, that's fine. You can bring them to the next interview.
There was also a question that I noticed earlier that we didn't have a chance to respond to, but I'll address it now, and hopefully the person is still here. They asked about interviewing for jobs out of state, and that is a really tough one because, as we talked about, it's definitely an advantage to have visited the physical library. I have done that. I have been in the position of applying for out-of-state jobs, however, and you definitely need to make sure that you spend a lot of time looking over the website and learning as much as you can from the website. And then even on the day of the interview, if you can show up an hour or two in advance and kind of lurk around the library, you'll really be able to pick up on a lot of stuff pretty quickly. And so it at least will give you something that you can mention. And I think that interviewers are going to recognize if they know that you live in another state, they'll probably understand that you maybe haven't had a chance to visit every single one of the branches in that system. But, you know, at least if you can start by talking about the things on the website, it'll give you a place to start.
I agree.
And Sally Ellis, yes, I would be very happy to talk to you anytime. Sure. My email address is right there. You can send me an email. I'd be happy to.
And you can contact either of us with questions about any of the stuff we've talked about today. We'd be happy to help you out.